Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. This webinar will discuss the changes that occurred in the pricing of transponders and the changes that occurred effective November 28th, allowing companies to purchase single trips. This pilot has ended and is now open at all ports of entry. And you can learn whether this option may be beneficial to you and the changes that might be needed in operations and what your drivers will need to know. For anyone who has questions during the webinar, please use the chat box or question box, and we will answer your questions at the conclusion. So let's get started. Here is Debbie Dent.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. What is going to be our last webinar for 2016. Where did the year go? So let's get started. We're going to talk about the transponder, and those transponders are the ones that are purchased through the DTOPS program, which is a U.S. initiative. Okay, so we'll start here in a second. Here we go. Okay, let's get some background going about the DTOPS. In December of 2015, the annual user fee paid was able to be purchased for 2016 without the announced 2016 increase. And that was for those companies that renewed or purchased their transponders prior to December 24th, 2015. They were grandfathered in at the old price of about $200. When ordering a commercial vehicle transponder, it is comprised of two fees. The one fee that is retained by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and then a second fee that is collected by CBP on behalf of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, the acronym APHIS, to recapture costs associated with conducting agricultural quarantine inspections at U.S. ports of entry. And although many of you might not even be hauling product that would be subject to that inspection service fee, that fee is still applied to all transponders that are being purchased or supplied by the DTOPS. So on December 28, 2015, the APHIS portion of the annual user fee increased from $105 to $301.67. The CBP part of the user fee actually remained the same as it had been for many years prior to. The total annual user fee for 2017, which was the same as it was in 2016 if you purchased within 2016 calendar year, is now $401.67 per commercial vehicle. So for many carriers that they renewed prior to December 24th, this is a pretty substantial increase. For those of you that have purchased prior or after or during the 2016 year, you may not have noticed that increase, but those carriers that had benefited by that purchase prior to this year are sort of looking at it and saying, wow, that's a pretty substantial increase. The fee is based on a calendar year from January 1st to December 31st, and if ordering or renewing halfway through the year or even just weeks before the end of the calendar year, that annual fee of $401.67 will in fact be charged if you wanted to order a transponder at this point. So let's talk about a few facts about that user fee. If you operate a vehicle for commercial purposes that enters into the U.S., you are subject to what is traditionally referred to as a user fee. Vehicles that arrive without a transponder provided through the DTOPS and properly affixed to that vehicle are required to pay per crossing when entering into the U.S., and that applies whether empty or loaded. The officer may allow you to actually move forward without that collection, but that was an officer's decision to do so. The rule and really the ability for them to collect that money has always been there if you were entering commercially. So that per crossing fee now is $13.05. So $5.50 of that is going to USCBP, and $7.55 is going to that APHIS. So those carriers that don't have a transponder, then your driver on arrival at that primary booth would pay or be expected to pay that $13.05. If an existing transponder is not renewed, so that truck might have a transponder mounted on its windshield but just wasn't renewed, it may actually continue to transmit information to the officer, but it won't be recognized at that port, and the officer as well would charge if that renewal or there isn't a current payment of that transponder that's affixed to the truck. So what changed? The ports of Buffalo, Detroit, and El Paso were selected as the first ports to automate the collection of commercial truck user fees. Basically, the customs no longer wanted their officers collecting that cash at the booth and having to handle that cash. It was delaying the process. Again, with the fee going to an odd amount like that $13.05, it probably was causing some issues. So the ports of Buffalo, Detroit, and El Paso were selected under a pilot that was announced to be in effect after June 2nd. Now, some ports, like the ports of Detroit, Port Huron, they have been for quite some time sending the trucks into secondary to make that payment. So if your truck arrived at the port without that, even ready to pay that amount, they weren't collecting it at the port and had already been doing this, and that was even prior to the June 2nd pilot. So what Customs announced was an electronic prepayment single user fee could now be purchased through the DTOPS account. So as a carrier, you could have your DTOPS account, and per VIN, you could now purchase a single crossing paying that $13.05 through the internet through their payment. So DTOPS will allow now the carriers to transact a single crossing user fee purchase per VIN, and it's purchased and would be activated or used based on the arrival at the border. As of November 28th here, DTOPS single crossing user fee pilot has now been extended to all ports of entry. So it's no longer just available at Detroit, El Paso, and Buffalo, but actually is available now for crossing at all ports of entry. To make a payment, users will set up an account in DTOPS, so as the carrier or the owner of the account, whether it's an owner-operator that has that account, they would need to create the account, they would register the vehicle that the VIN is, that the payment is being made for, select the single crossing payment option, and check out with the secure online payment system. So paying with a credit card, DTOPS will confirm that payment by providing an electronic receipt. The receipt is provided to the officer on arrival at the booth by the driver, if not already recognized as being paid as that vehicle pulls forward. The single crossing vehicle details, if you're going to purchase one, is going to include you registering that vehicle, the VIN number, the license plate associated to that particular conveyance, the country of issue of that license plate, the state or province of the issue of that license plate, a vehicle cab or unit number. And if you don't have a cab number, then they recommend you can use the last 5 digits of the VIN number. The make, the model, and the year of that vehicle, the color, and is the carrier company CTPAT FAST approved, and if yes, you can also enter the CTPAT carrier FAST ID number. So now this purchase of a single crossing vehicle fee includes all the details that would be commonly provided during the annual purchase or renewal of a transponder for a vehicle. The benefits. Carriers with vehicles which may only occasionally cross do not require to purchase that annual transponder any longer, but still have the same processing at the booth as a conveyance with a transponder, including access to the fast lane where that fast lane access is in fact applicable. So fast lane access being for that fast approved company with a fast approved driver with fast approved cargo or empty crossing the border. According to Customs, it is going to reduce fuel consumption and wait times, and I'm sure it will improve the wait time of the officer handling that cash. Carriers, though, with volumes of 30 or more crossings per conveyance per year should still continue to purchase or renew the transponder. It's still a better option for you than doing that single purchase. The benefit, though, of having to make maybe temporary changes of conveyance is now much easier to manage. So, for example, a vehicle goes out of service and you're going to replace it with a temporary rental vehicle, you can just purchase that single crossing fee for that new vehicle that is going to be crossing just temporarily until the maybe permanent unit that had that transponder goes back into service. Often what would happen is we would hear from a company that was changing out a vehicle, maybe renting something, whether it be longer term or shorter term, and all of a sudden when we would come to register that unit, we would receive a message that DTOPS already recognized there had been a transponder purchased for that unit and may still be active. The transponder, though, may not be in the unit. So it's going to make making those temporary changes much easier to manage than it was before. It may also decrease the need for transfers or reduce the number of deactivations that occur today. So technically, what should happen if you've paid for that transponder and that vehicle moves and is no longer in your fleet or taken out of service or whatever the condition, you should deactivate immediately, and you should deactivate immediately if your FAST ID number is tied to that unit. You don't want a truck that is no longer part of your fleet receiving benefit associating them to you when it's in fact not in place any longer. So potential changes that this might create. Commonly, user access for that DTOPS was assigned to someone specific within the company that usually wasn't involved in the dispatch or daily operations. And at this time, DTOPS still restricts the number of users that you can have associated to your account. So it would now potentially mean sharing information that probably shouldn't really be shared because there is a restriction of 1 or 2 users to your account. Purchasing for single crossings should now be considered to be handled by those persons, your dispatcher, your operations, that's also managing your ACE or your cross-border setup. Those DTOP portal is again a standalone portal that may require training for use and still requires a close managing to ensure no errors occur that could potentially delay that truck or the border crossing. So again, from an operational standpoint or a management standpoint, before you might decide to go that way, you really need to think about what impact this might have on our day-to-day operations. If we move this to our dispatch, because they're the ones now managing the cross-border activity, is this going to cause them some additional workload? Is this even feasible? Do we want to have multiple people going into or having access to that information when in fact you may want to keep it a more restricted process? Drivers, of course, will need to receive a copy of that receipt, and this also should be provided now if you're going to take up that option through that ACE or cross-border setup. And again, I know there's sometimes some costs related to getting that driver that piece of paper that they may need out on the road. Now, we are being told that electronically that proof of release or proof of payment, that receipt, if the email can be shown to the officer or, you can display it on a smartphone or a tablet. Some of the ports are accepting that, but again, it's a real hit and miss, and again, this is something new, so we're waiting to see how that's going to play out. But currently, it would be expected that the driver would arrive to show customs that single purchase has occurred prior to his arrival, and the driver would have a receipt to show the officer. So let's talk about some frequently asked questions about this particular initiative. Is my account information still secure? DTOP user ID and password are required to access your information, and it's handled. Now you need to sort of consider that. How long is my information or single purchase stored for? There is no policy of removing any single purchases made. So it's not like it's going to expire. It's not going to purge out of the system. If you make a purchase against a conveyance, it will sit there as long as the system, I guess, makes it available. How is the annual user fee option more cost-effective than the single crossing fee? The annual fee is capped at that $401.67 per VIN, where a single crossing fee could exceed that amount, again, based on the number of crossings. If you're doing more than 30 crossings, with that specific conveyance or VIN, then I would recommend you definitely want to consider purchasing that annual transponder, since it is going to cap the amount that you're going to pay. Can I purchase a transponder if the vehicle has an unused single crossing fee? Yes, this will not prevent you from updating or paying the annual fee if there is still a crossing that hasn't occurred that you've paid for. Is the expiration date for transponder decals and single crossing fees the same? The program still is the expiry date, regardless of the annual purchase or the single crossing, still will be December 31st of a current year of purchase. So if you make purchases right now for 2017, they're not going to expire until December 31st of 2017. If you made a purchase right now for 2016, unfortunately, it is going to expire on December 31st here of 2016. Can a single crossing fee be paid, transferred, or exchanged? The answer to that at this point is no. That purchase only applies to the specific VIN associated answering those previous screen questions, and it's purchased for, and if unused, is basically money out of your pocket. So you don't want to potentially, and unfortunately customs are also restricting at this point, you can only purchase and have on file one single crossing per VIN, so that you can't say, okay, I'm going to try to buy 10 single purchase crossings for that one VIN. It doesn't work currently that way. We expect changes are in that direction. When they started to talk about this, we were kind of hoping they might treat it like other accounts where you could maybe load on a credit card set amount. I suspect if this works, they're probably, and there isn't a lot of issues, they may extend this where you may not only be able to buy a single purchase, but maybe buy a number of single crossings. For example, you know, something saying I'm going to purchase 5 at a time, or I'd like to purchase 10 at a time. Again, your option currently is a single purchase per VIN for the transponder, where you pay the full annual fee of $401.67. So just to sort of recap this little initiative, like most programs, it's still very new. It may vary from port to port. Remember, Detroit, Port Huron, Detroit, Buffalo, and El Paso have been doing this now for about 6 months. The other ports have just recently been added where this was available. We're hearing that some ports, companies have made those single purchase, and in fact when they got to the port and arrived and the officer was handled that receipt, basically the officer said to the driver, what is this and what am I supposed to do with it? and they weren't even aware that the program existed or had been expanded to open up to all ports. Of course, like anything that's new, there's going to be continued enhancements coming, including the ability to pay, hopefully, for multiple crossings at one time per VIN number. As I mentioned, there are still some inconsistencies between ports, so ask an officer when crossing at that location whether they may continue to allow a cash payment. Although we know that cash payment is going to go away, it still may be, in fact, allowed at certain ports. The ports may still continue to accept that cash payment. They may defer the truck from the primary booth to a secondary location, send the driver into. We're also told by many companies that were not equipped with the transponder and using that cash option that after they got deferred inside, they were always then also going through X-ray and seemed to be going through some sort of an inspection. So whether sending them inside triggered that second step or not, we're not really sure. But what you want to do is, if your truck is crossing, pretty regularly at different ports of entry, find out what is actually occurring at that port. Are they still allowing the cash payment? Are they still collecting it at the primary booth? Are they going to allow that cash payment to be done inside? Detroit is still collecting money inside in that secondary, but even that, they're trying to get away from that cash collection period. They'd really like people and carriers to transition to either purchasing a or doing this prepayment per single crossing. So communicate the issues or successes to us, please. Like you, we are still trying to see how this will impact the industry, and we truly do welcome your feedback. If included in that feedback, if you're sending an email, if you could tell me what port of entry that truck arrived. Now keep in mind, this is strictly a U.S. initiative, always has been. There is no similar user fee coming into Canada. That DTOPS, that purchase of that transponder for this purpose, and it's separate from what other prepayment or transponders that you might have to do with toll collections, border, the bridges, things like that. This is strictly to pay what was traditionally referred to as the user fee. Now the part that we're not real sure yet, and we're asking some questions but not getting a whole lot of feedback, is that fast ID number and potentially those proprietary softwares that are being used by, for example, the GM, the Ford, and the Chrysler, that fast point. Once you provide information within that system, it recognizes through that fast ID number that particular piece of equipment. We are not sure how quickly all of this occurs. If you did a single crossing fee, would that vehicle, if it was actually crossing in a true fast environment and you had tried to set it up, would that fast point software be able to recognize that particular VIN number, or would it not recognize? So we're waiting for some feedback. So anyone that might be out there, that if you can provide us information, we would be happy to, be able to share that information, and we can all benefit by that information. So this would be a good time to provide any questions that you might have on the topic. If there's anyone on the call that really isn't very familiar, I did this presentation with the idea that most of the people that might be attending this webinar or listening in are familiar with the DTOPS, setting up your account, potentially even navigating that specific portal to renew or to purchase or manage your inventory. If you're on the call and you're really not familiar with the DTOPS and don't understand, happy to entertain some of those questions. but just for maybe the time benefit of everyone else, we might ask you just to make a phone call into us, and we'll answer those separately and sort of give you some background on the DTOPS, the decal, how you register your business and things like that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Justin to see if we have any questions out there. And if we don't, then we'll close this presentation up fairly quickly here and go back to doing what we were doing today.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Okay, we're going to take a 30 to 60-second break here and see if any questions populate here. Again, use the chat box or the question box, and we'll answer your question. So just bear with us. All right, it looks like there's no questions. Looks like you answered everybody's questions during the webinar, Debbie. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, if you have questions regarding this webinar or any other information, you can contact Debbie or our consulting division directly at 1-800-596-5176, or you can email them directly at consulting@BorderConnect.com, which you can find on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. To attend our next webinar, please keep an eye on BorderConnect's events page, where we'll post any upcoming events or webinars. Or follow us on Facebook or Google+, where we will not only post upcoming events and webinars, but also any new customs news and information, as well as any software updates to BorderConnect. This webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel as well. You can find BorderConnect's YouTube channel if you go to youtube.com and search for BorderConnect, all one word, and it should be the first bunch of links that show up. And also, I would highly recommend subscribing to our YouTube channel. The reason being is because you can find, first off, our full library of webinars, and you can find tutorial videos and other helpful tips and tricks to using the BorderConnect software. Also, for anyone looking for a one-stop shop for all your PARS, PAP stickers, as well as any other customs documents such as A8As, in-transit manifests, and NCAP sheets, visit borderprint.com. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year. Thank you very much, everybody.